What's up, everyone? You're listening to the Wildcast podcast, Apple, Spotify, Tucson.com, all of that fun stuff. That's Michael Lev. I'm Justin Spears. We're going to be talking about a number of things. It's going to be like a potpourri of Arizona / Tucson topics. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and comment the Spears and Ali podcast. Or not, Spears and Ali. Sorry. That's my other job, the Wildcast podcast. Let's clarify. I got multiple jobs.
People can rate and comment on both if they want to.
Yes, do that.
Make sure
do that.
They give us a nice rating.
Yes. I feel like
welcome back, Justin. You're a little rusty, back. Clearly.
Yeah. I feel like Michael Keaton and the other guys, when he's like going through his like police work and like, we got these reports. Wait, sorry, that's my other job. And like it zooms out and he's wearing a Bed Bath & Beyond apron. He's like a manager at Bed Bath & Beyond talking about being a New York police chief. But no, it feels good to be back. Great to hit the reset button. And I'm coming back at a pretty decent time because there's so much stuff happening this week and beyond, which we're pretty much going to touch on all of that. But Lev, here, I mean, we're recording this podcast on Thursday, and in just a couple of days, maybe by the time you're listening to this podcast, it's already March. And you know what happens in March? Madness. And Arizona basketball for both programs are in pretty interesting positions right now. The Wildcats men's team, they just beat Utah after losing to BYU. And now they got to go on the road and play against a very tough Iowa State team that is, yes, they lost to Oklahoma State recently. A pretty bad Oklahoma State team, but this is still an Iowa State team that's one of the better teams in the Big 12, a team that's very capable of going to the Final Four, heck, even winning a national championship. And they lost to Arizona at McKell Center off a crazy overtime game when Caleb Love tied the game with that 60-foot heave, tied it, put the game into overtime. Then Arizona took care of business in that extra period. And it's tough to beat the same team twice in a season. And especially when that other team is a top 10 team. And Arizona's got to go on the road to Ames, Iowa to play against a tough Cyclones team. So that'll be a very tough matchup for Arizona on Saturday. And then you got the women's team fighting for their postseason lives right now. They've won 3 straight games, including an overtime thriller at Houston. And then they won their senior night game against Texas Tech. They're 18-12 right now. They got a game against ASU to round out the regular season. Then they got to go on the road to the Big 12 tournament in Kansas City. And I would probably say, Lev, it's probably fair to say that they need at least 2 wins if they want a fighter's chance at getting to the NCAA tournament. That lucky number is 20. They're sitting at 18 wins now. I feel like if they get over that 20-win threshold, they should feel okay about their NCAA tournament chances. It doesn't look so good right now, but I feel like if they put together a couple of wins, Arizona women's basketball should be in decent shape to maybe make the tournament.
So where do you want me to start? You want me to start with the
men?
Yeah,
honestly, I did a terrible job of setting you up. So that's my rust showing, being in the host chair. Let's start off with the women first, because you've been filling in for PJ Brown, our colleague, as she's battling an illness right now, trying to overcome that. Hopefully she feels better very soon. But the women's team, you've been filling in, you've been watching them, you've been keeping tabs on them all season long.
Yep.
How do you feel about where they stand right now as a team?
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting because they kind of put themselves in a situation where they needed to win out to get to that 20-win mark. They were, not that long ago, 15-12, and it wasn't looking that good. But when you looked at the schedule that they had down the stretch, they're playing many of the worst teams in the Big 12. And thus far, they've taken care of business. They beat BYU. They barely beat Houston. I mean, they were down, I think, 13 with 5:45 left in that game. And they cranked up the full court press, rallied to beat a Cougars team that's the last place team in the league. I mean, a game that they really should have won easier than that, but they did win it. And then they beat Texas Tech. So now they're 18-12. ASU is also one of the lower echelon teams in the Big 12. So if they can take care of business in Tempe, they're 19-12. Now here's the part where it gets super interesting. If Colorado wins out, and I think they finished against Texas Tech, Colorado and Arizona will finish with the same record, but Colorado would have the tiebreaker and would be 8th. Arizona would be 9th in the Big 12, and that would be the perfect position because as the 9th place team, even though you have to play in the first round, you play the 16th place team, which would be Houston again. They've seen them. They kind of know what they're about. Houston won't have its home court. You would think Arizona would be able to win that game, which would put them at that magical figure of 20 wins. Now, 20 wins does not guarantee a berth in the NCAA tournament, but if you win 20 games and you play in a power conference, pretty good chance that you're going to get in. So, and then, they could conceivably beat Colorado too. I mean, that's a kind of a coin flip sort of game for them. So, I mean, I don't think like this is a great Arizona women's basketball team. I'm sure Adia Barnes would tell you that. The way that she has kind of set things up, I mean, this is a young team that should be better next year if they can keep it together, right? I mean, most of the primary players on this team are sophomores and freshmen.
Yeah.
So they're young, they're improving, they show glimpses of greatness, but it's very inconsistent from game to game. But hey, if you can squeeze out another NCAA tournament berth, I think that would be a feather in Adia's cap. Like I think one of her better coaching jobs, to be sure.
I think last year is probably better considering how much depth or lack thereof, right? Because they had pretty much 5.5 players they were working with last year.
I mean, that was
6
insane
players.
What they had last year. I mean, they lost a bunch of players to injuries. Some players left the team, suspensions, just all kinds of things happened. But there were there were games where they had 6 players. And I mean, you know how hard it is to win when you have 10 players or 12 players. Like to have 6, I mean, there was just kind of no margin for error. They had a bunch of losses like in overtime. But you can never say that an Adia Barnes coach team doesn't play hard because they always play hard. It might not look great all the time. Like sometimes the offense bogs down and it's kind of clunky on that end, but they play really hard. They play hard on defense, and they will go down with a fight. I guarantee it.
So now going over to the men's side of things.
Yes.
Arizona beat who did they beat recently?
Utah.
I don't know. I had Texas Tech in my head. And I'm like, wait, they didn't play Texas Tech. They beat Utah. And it was expected for them to beat Utah. They kind of got sloppy there in the second half a little bit. Like it almost felt like they went on like autopilot mode. Like they just coasted through the second half. At any point did I feel like the lead wasn't threatened? Like I was like, Arizona's going to win this game. They're going to be just fine. But they kind of coasted there in the second half. But the thing that really jumped out to me about the first half and how they were able to get up to such a big lead was their defense. And all of the critical figures in the rotation, those 8 guys that they rely on, each of them had a steal in that game. And so the kind of the story of the loss to BYU was, I mean, they shot lights out. I mean, they were like 40, nearly 45% from 3-point range or something like that, or well over 40%. They shot over 50% from the field, if I'm not mistaken, against BYU. So offensively, they were great against BYU, but I think probably the tail of their game against Utah was the defensive side of the ball, creating those steals, getting out into transition. I feel like Caleb Love, we're seeing him finally in the final stage of his evolution as a player, right? We already knew that he was a great scorer, but now he's getting his teammates involved. He's playing great defensively. To me, that's been the biggest improvement in Caleb Love's game. It's just his aggressiveness, playing defense. And I think defensively right now, Arizona basketball is in a really good place. And that's going to bode well for them in the tournament. If there's going to be moments where those shots don't fall. Like I always think about the Sweet 16 loss to Houston. That was a great offensive team. Like you could honestly make an argument that was the greatest offensive team in Arizona basketball history. And then they go out and they just lay an egg against Houston. Why? Because Houston was tougher than them. They were more physical. They played better defense. And I feel like Arizona, they're completely different from that team a couple years ago, where defense is starting to become really their bread and butter and the backbone of the team.
That's the Big 12 effect, right? Like, it's if you don't play that way in the Big 12, you are not going to have success. Period, point blank. And Arizona has kind of changed its identity this year. I mean, they are a defensive oriented team. It was moderately surprising to see them struggle against BYU, but BYU's done that to a lot of people. I mean, Opta Stats posted these factoids the other night. In each of their last 3 games, BYU has scored at least 90 points, shot at least 50% from the field, made at least a dozen threes, and had fewer than a dozen turnovers. And according to Opta Stats, no other Division I team this century has done that for 3 games in a row. So that is a very good offensive team coached by Kevin Young, who came from the NBA. He was an assistant coach with the 76ers. He was an assistant coach with the Phoenix Suns. He runs an NBA-style offense, tons of pick and roll. If they're not, hitting someone rolling to the basket, they're setting up a 3.
Yeah.
And they shoot a ton of threes, and they've got a lot of guys who can shoot threes. And if Arizona does have one weakness on defense, I would say is probably defending the 3-point arc.
Yeah.
They kind of have a philosophy of inside out, which a lot of teams do. And if you're hitting like BYU did the other night, the game's going to be in the 90s. And usually Arizona's comfortable in a situation like that. I think you posted the stat about like when they score 90 plus points, like how ridiculously, I think it was like 43 and 1 or something, now 43 and 2, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Like usually they win if the game's in the 90s. But I feel like they can win both ways now. They can win if it's in the 90s. They can win if it's in the 60s. I think they would prefer the faster paced game, etc. But they have some bulldogs on defense. Like I think KJ Lewis is one. Carter Bryant is a really good. I don't think he's like not necessarily like a fundamentally sound defensive player, but he just gets his hand on the ball a lot.
Yeah.
Right. He's a really good shot blocker. He's really good as deployed on the press. And I think Henry Vasar has been an influential figure on defense. Like I swear it seems like he's taller than 7 feet. Like I would love to know what his wingspan is because it seems like nobody can shoot over him, And then Toby Awaka, he's not a Henry Vasar style big. He's just big and strong. He's
my guy
hard
Ollie
to move.
Calls him. You'll appreciate this, Lev. Ollie on the radio show this week called him Charles Oakley light.
Yeah, I've made that comparison. Yeah, he is a Charles Oakley type of player, to be sure. And he grew up in New York, so I'm sure he's familiar with Oak's game.
Yeah,
from back in the day. And then you mentioned Caleb Love's improvement. I think Jaden Bradley is a pretty good defender as well. So yeah, there's going to be a little bit of human nature that kicks in a game like this last one against Utah, where you get a big lead, you kind of put it on cruise control. I think that's okay. I'm sure Tommy Lloyd doesn't love it, especially since he thought they were quote unquote, casual going into the BYU game. But I think they're in a good place. Worst case scenario, probably looking at losing 2 out of the last 3, but maybe they can steal one against Iowa State or Kansas. I know Iowa State's got some injuries. They've been slumping a little bit. Kansas has been very, very up and down, although it'll be hard to win there on senior day, the last game of the season. But I think a lot of us thought that Arizona would struggle in the Big 12 a lot more than they have. And here they are at 13-4 in the league. And I think they might be like 1 win away from clinching a top 4 berth, which, gives you the double bye in the tournament. Very impressive. I mentioned earlier that I thought this was one of Adia's better coaching jobs. I think this is Tommy Lloyd's best coaching job so far, because I think, you feel free to disagree with me on this, I think it might be in some ways the least talented roster he's had.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and also just the turnaround too, right? The previous teams, in the non-conference schedule, we would all look at them like, okay, they're a surefire NCAA tournament team. I can't believe we were actually talking about this, Lev, when Arizona was 4-5 in non-conference play. We were like, bubble team. Heck, they might not even make the tournament. And that to me was so shocking, considering this team started ranked number 9 in the country. If they don't make the tournament, if they keep going at this path, or if they keep following this path that they're on, man, Tommy Lloyd, I'm not going to say he should be on the hot seat, but that seat is very, very, very warm. And what did they do? They were 4-5, and they became one of the best teams, not only in the Big 12, but in the country. I know the ranking shows them in the low 20s, right? They're ranked number 22 right now. But to me, Arizona basketball and the players that they have, this is a team that could win a championship. And there is no team that is head and shoulders above everybody else. When the NCAA tournament comes out, I feel like it is anyone's game. Of course, you're going to have your heavy hitters in there. Like we mentioned, Iowa State. I know they're slumping a little bit, but that's a team they can, figure it out late in March. They're going to be a really good team. Auburn, they are probably the most experienced team in all of college basketball. Like the average age in their starting 5 is like 23 years old. Like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is 24 years old, and everyone in Auburn is like relatively the same age. So, there are some teams that are going to be great, but I feel like, Arizona, they're in that mix of teams that I feel very comfortable saying that they could win a national championship. But the turnaround, Lev, like we haven't seen a turnaround in a Tommy Lloyd team ever. Like there were that first team with Benedict Mathurin and Christian Coloco and all those guys. Those guys exceeded the expectations, but they exceeded expectations from the first day. This team really had to take their licks this season. They had to go through some adversity. They figured it out. And Tommy Lloyd found his rotation. Like I'm not going to lie to you, Lev. When I saw that Anthony Delorso was being installed into the starting lineup for that first time, I'm like, what has he done to warrant being in the starting spot? Come to find out, it was a fantastic move. So I agree with you, man. I think this is probably one of Tommy Lloyd's, if not the best coaching job that Tommy Lloyd has done.
So they haven't had to engineer a turnaround in the past because, they had been dominant in the month of November. I think part of that, the whole thing is scheduling to a degree. I mean, they played a lot of good teams this year. I mean, their first loss was at Wisconsin, and they faced Duke at home. And I think Duke is as good as anybody. They've got at least 2 lottery picks on that team, maybe 3. I mean, that young, but really, really talented team. And they, lost 2 coin flip games in the Bahamas against Oklahoma and West Virginia. Really shouldn't have lost the UCLA game. No. But sometimes a bad loss, it's the best thing that can happen to you. Like I look at last year's Arizona baseball team. They had this miserable midweek loss to New Mexico State, and it was the turning point of the season. They were like, we can't let this happen again. This is unacceptable. This isn't up to our standards. Blowing that lead to UCLA late in the game, they haven't been the same team since in a good way, right? They are a vastly improved team. Now, can they make a run like all the way to the Final Four? I think, and I hate to say this, but I think it might hinge on Caleb Love. Like if you get the Caleb Love that we saw against Utah for just 3 weeks, if he gets on a hot streak, I think they could win the national championship. I really do.
But Caleb Love also has to understand he doesn't have to be Superman every single game. And I feel like he has learned this season that he doesn't have to go for 25 or 30 points in order for Arizona to have a legitimate shot at winning. He's actually getting his teammates more involved. I think defense and passing are the 2 things that Caleb Love has really implemented in his game this year.
Yeah, I agree. He is a better all-around player. I guess my point is they're a good team when he doesn't shoot the ball well, but when he does, they are a great team.
Absolutely.
But the problem is you just have no idea what you're going to get.
Yeah.
On any
it's like a box of chocolates.
Right? He is the box of chocolates type of player. You don't know. And look, I've said this many times, like you can contribute in other aspects of the game if your shot's not falling. Like he's a pretty good playmaker. right? He can be a good defender when he is fully engaged, and I think he's gotten to the point where he doesn't let it bother him if he's not scoring, because that's a really easy trap to fall into for a young player, especially. I see it all the time. With Skylar Jones, for example, she was in a real major funk earlier this year for the women's team, and you could just see like she had this kind of hangdog expression a lot on the court. She's just letting, like, when she was struggling on offense, she was letting it affect all aspects of her game, and she's kind of worked through that. And I don't think Caleb shows that, like, in terms of his facial expressions or his body language as much, but you can tell sometimes when a player is struggling on one end, they let it affect them on the other end. And I think he's gotten to the point where he realizes, hey, if my shot's not falling, it's okay. I can help the team in other ways.
I know you're going to talk to Bruce about this coming up here shortly, but I know Caleb Love has only been here for 2 years, but I think that'll be a special senior day for him. One final game at McHale Center before they go to Kansas to end the regular season. But kind of looking back on the Utah and BYU games, kind of a interesting situation, like the BYU game, the way that it ended with the awful call by Tony Padilla. Now, and I said this, I tweeted it, like, multiple things can be true, right? Arizona necessarily didn't deserve to win that game, but they didn't deserve to lose like that. Like, Tony Padilla making that call all the way at the half court line, I thought was just absolutely egregious. Like, that was so terrible. And again, Arizona gave up 93 points leading up to that point, or 94 or whatever. So the fact that they let a team come in and score the most points since Jimmer dropped 49 points on them back in 2009. That is the most points that Arizona has given up in a game at McHale Center since Jimmer dropped 49. Of course, it was the BYU team. So Arizona didn't necessarily help themselves out, but that bad call at the end, I felt for Trey Townsend, because he didn't play hardly any minutes in that game. He had 9 minutes the entire night, didn't really play in the second half. They put him in there for defense responsibilities, and he gets a ghost foul call on him. So that was just such an unfortunate ending. And then they bounced back. They beat Utah, and I think the most interesting thing that came from that was Tommy Lloyd's reaction to Craig Smith getting fired and saying that his two sons one is a walk-on, one's a manager, and they still traveled to Tucson. They are still invested into the basketball program when their dad was just fired. And for Tommy Lloyd to kind of get choked up and talking about, I guess, the human side of sports that we don't necessarily talk about, I thought that was really cool to see. Tommy Lloyd's not necessarily a crier. He's not a guy that's, all in his feels all the time. But to see that, I thought was really cool. But yeah, interesting last couple games at McHale Center.
So regarding the ending of the BYU game, hot take, I think that it actually might have been a foul. But okay, because he kind of hip checked him a little bit. However, there was an official on the baseline, like 6 feet away, who did not make a call.
Yeah.
And the one who did make the call was probably 30 feet away and looking through other players. So I think, like, from the mechanics of officiating, that it shouldn't have been called.
Yeah.
Right. Also, the guy, was it Richie Saunders? Is that who it was? I can't remember if which BYU player it was, but
yeah,
put himself in a position where, like, he kind of had no options. He had to take, like, kind of a fall away jump shot, and you're rewarding that player. So there's just a lot of circumstances that went into that. Hey, look, none of that or whatever happened after the game warrants what the Zona Zoo was chanting toward BYU. Absolutely unacceptable, disgraceful. And I'm glad that Desiree Reed-Francois, Arizona's athletic director, issued an immediate reprimand and apology. for that, and hopefully additional, actions will be taken, because there's just no place for that business. Tommy addressed that as well. And then, as you mentioned, he was very emotional talking about Craig Smith and his family after the game. And what I took away from that was that it was genuine.
Yeah.
It came from the heart. You could tell because Tommy was like legit, like getting a little bit choked up. And I think most successful coaches, and maybe this goes for successful leaders as well, like you have to be yourself. Like you have to be who you are. And if you're not, people will see through that.
Yeah.
And you will not be as effective. Whatever your personality is, right? Like you can't be phony. I heard Rich Rod on a podcast this week kind of saying the same thing when Bruce Feldman asked him about his personality, and he's like, like he hasn't changed that much. Like he kind of, you know what you're getting, and you have to be who you are. You can't be a phony. Kids will see right through that, and they will not respond to you. And I think that's one of the reasons that people want to play for Tommy Lloyd. And I think that's one of the reasons that he's a good coach and he gets a lot out of his players.
Very sympathetic in that situation. And because he knows exactly what Craig Smith goes through. And Tommy Lloyd even said, through the good times, things are really hard because, we sacrifice so much time away from our families, and it can be hard sometimes. So I thought that was just refreshing to see with Tommy getting really emotional, talking about his colleague, Craig Smith, being out at Utah. But now
I'm sure it's cool for Tommy to have his son Liam on the team this year too, for one last ride. This way you can, even when you're at work, you can have one of your family members with you.
Yeah, right.
At work. So I'm sure that that's a very cool experience for him. We don't appreciate as fans or as media, like the sacrifices that these coaches make, it is really an all-encompassing job. There's so much pressure on them to succeed. And, it's really like when the season starts until the time it ends, it's like, see you later, honey.
Yeah.
And the time you have is so minimal. You're on the road. If you're not on the road playing, you might be on the road recruiting. There's constantly stuff that you have to deal with. So I was glad to see that Tommy brought some of that to light.
Whenever baseball season comes around, do you tell Mrs. Lev, see you, honey? I got baseball season.
She knows. It's really more, I feel like it's really more football season.
Yep.
Because, not only do we cover the out of Arizona football, but then, there's also the NFL on Thursday, Sunday, Monday. She knows the routine. She's been through it plenty of times.
Well, speaking of baseball,
yeah,
Arizona baseball, they're on the road. They're back in Texas. Now, the first trip in Texas didn't necessarily go so well.
Not so hot.
And yeah. Chip kind of pushed back on me. You'll like this, Lev. So I had him on the radio show this week, and I was like, so I see you're kind of near the bottom of the Big 12 when it comes to pitching. You gave up a ton of runs. So are you not happy with the pitching? And he's like, we didn't necessarily struggle. We struggled for a few innings, and we gave up a boatload of runs. But if you look at outside of those few innings where Arizona gave up a bunch of runs, Arizona's pitching was pretty solid. You've obviously have been following this team very closely. What do you think about Arizona baseball right now as they get ready for another road trip to Houston, where they got to face, I would say, probably better teams than that first trip to Dallas?
Yeah. They had some bad innings, some big, bad, rough innings in Arlington, to be sure. Things kind of got away from them. I think there was, against both Clemson and Louisville, some crooked numbers, like big crooked numbers. And it wasn't like they're giving up a bunch of home runs, doubles or triples. Like the other teams had very mature approaches at the plate. They were putting the ball in play. They were hitting it up the middle. They were hitting it to the opposite field. They were good. They're smart. Good learning experience, I think, for some pitchers who are, participating in Division I baseball for the first time in their lives. And we've seen some bounce backs. Michael Hilker for example, I think came from Wisconsin. Get it wrong. I think it's Wisconsin Whitewater, Division III. Really struggled his first time out, and he played an integral role in their win on Sunday against San Diego. Jack Berg, who transferred from, I think it's Tacoma Community College, really struggled his first time out. Pitched really well against Rice on Wednesday night. So those are good signs. The hitting has been much better since that opening series. I think they feasted on home cooking. They love to play and hit at High Corbett Field. That carried over to the Rice game, which is good. If anyone wants to look at the highlights that Arizona Baseball posted on Twitter/X, you will note that like all of the hits are to the opposite field, which to me suggests a more mature approach at the plate. Now, all that being said, they're facing the number 1, number 18, and number 3 teams in the country in this tournament in Houston. So big test. I mean, if they can win one of those games, it would probably be considered just fine. They can somehow find a way to win 2. That would be gravy. You just don't want to get swept again, especially in the fashion that they got swept. Like the first game was a 1-run game, and they got blown out in the next 2 in Arlington. So you want to be competitive. As Chip Hale said to us today, like at some point in time, you got to win some of these games, to prove that you can play at that level. So it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out. They're playing at the Astros ballpark. Used to be called Minute Maid, is now Dakin Field or Dakin Park, I think, which is an air conditioning company. So they've gone from the juice box to the ice box, maybe. But I think High Corbett might be the juice box now. Like might have like sole rights to that juice box nickname. For High C. I mean, I don't know. There might be another ballpark out there that could call itself the juice box, but the Astros can't anymore. So, if I'm Arizona, I would play up that High C juice box angle as much as I could.
I wanted to hear your perspective of this Frenchman that Arizona Baseball has.
Matisse Miron.
Okay, yeah. So the first Frenchborn player to play at the power level
born and raised
college basketball, born and raised. Yeah. You don't hear too many Frenchmen playing baseball. What's this guy's story?
Yeah. I mean, I haven't interviewed him yet. I'm very much looking forward to that occasion. So I don't know how he ended up at Cochise College. I can only imagine what he was thinking when he moved from France to Douglas, Arizona. Talk about like the culture shock must have been significant. But he's a very natural looking baseball player, like super smooth. He was a shortstop. He's playing third base. He's big, about 6'2", 6'3", over 200 pounds. He's a switch hitter. He's got power. Chip said he's been nursing a bit of a hamstring injury, so we haven't seen him maybe run as well as he can. But he's someone who conceivably could have been drafted last year coming out of Cochise. And he had a hip labrum issue, needed surgery, decided to have the surgery, decided to come to Arizona where he had committed, and didn't play much in the fall, but really impressive in the ramp up to the season. And it's gotten to a point where Chip can't take him out of the lineup. He gave him a planned day of rest on Wednesday, but I would expect to see him in there this weekend, and he's going to be a story. He looks like a dude. I saw a scouting report of him. I was reading this last night that suggested he could work his way into the top 5 rounds of the draft this year. We'll see how things go. Pitchers and opposing coaches will adjust once they get a book on him a little bit, but the tools are there and they are impressive.
We got to work on a nickname for our guy. Frenchman playing baseball.
Yeah, that's a Brian Peterson kind of thing. He comes up with a nickname, so I will task our colleague Brian to come up with a good nickname. He's already like
the big baguette.
He and the Arizona baseball account have been tweeting all sorts of stuff in French already, so we're kind of down that road a little bit.
So Arizona baseball, they're now in Houston for that big time series. That's massive. Again, number 1 ranked team in the country, number 3, right? You're
Yeah,
facing two
well,
top 5 teams and then the
yeah,
number 18 team.
yeah, and Tennessee and Texas A&M faced each other in the College World Series finals last year. So they're facing
Jeez.
both finalists. Yeah, it's a good test. It's a good test for them. All the games are on Astros.com,
Yeah.
and I think if I read this correctly, some of them are going to be shown on replay on MLB Network too,
Oh,
like
cool.
later in the day. So ample opportunities to check out Arizona baseball.
And then Arizona softball, they're 16-2 right now on the season. They're now getting away from Rita Hillenbrand Stadium for the first time this season. They just beat Loyola Marymount on Wednesday, and now they have the Judy Garman Classic in Fullerton, where they'll face Weber State, Cal State, Fullerton, Notre Dame, UCLA, and San Diego State. And then Big 12 play is officially here.
Yeah, I would say the most impressive thing to me about softball so far is they've been winning without their best player. Like Dakota Kennedy has been out for a while with some sort of wrist or hand situation. I think it happened when she was sliding into a base or something. Preseason All-American, leadoff hitter. I think she won a Gold Glove last year.
Yep.
In left field. So they're winning without her, which is a great sign, I think, for what's to come. And also the return of Devin Netz has been significant. Not only her hitting, but she's pitching really well too. The one thing that they've lacked in the last few years is that ace pitcher. And yeah, maybe a healthy Devin Netz can be that.
And not only do we have softball, baseball for Arizona athletics, there's also the World Baseball Classic qualifiers coming to town. This weekend, we got China, Germany, Brazil, and Colombia. Those 4 teams will set up here. They'll, look to get to the World Baseball Classic. And, fun little fact, Lev, I didn't know this until our guy Blake Eager from Southern Arizona Sports Tourism and Film Authority. He said that apparently the grass at Keno Stadium was reseeded for the first time since 1998, which is the first season of the Tucson Sidewinders. And I think about how many Sidewinders games have been played there, how many spring training games have been played there, KFMA Day, fall ball, all these concerts. Like that, a lot of people have been on that grass, and they pretty much gave it a completely new look. It looks nice and fresh, and I can't wait because we have professional baseball back in Tucson. I mean, we have it every single year with the Mexican Baseball Fiesta, but it's cool to see guys representing their country and having multiple countries. Right? We saw it, with the 4 nations face off with hockey, just kind of the passion these athletes have representing their country. There's a documentary on Netflix where Kevin Durant is kind of breaking down into tears, talking about what it means to him to represent the United States. So you're going to feel a lot of passion. And these guys who are professional baseball players, some of them are playing in Major League Baseball. You're going to feel it this weekend, and it's going to be a fun event. I can't wait for the World Baseball Classic.
Yeah, so they resodded the entire field and the bullpens for the first time in, like you said, 27 years, basically. They also have a new scoreboard. The previous scoreboard was the original scoreboard, so you can imagine how out of date that was from 1998 technology to what we have now. Among other upgrades that have been made at Keno Veterans Memorial Stadium, and they are hoping to bring professional baseball back here on a permanent basis. They're trying to get a minor league team here. They're trying to get like a sprinkling of spring training games back here. That's what Blake Eager and Edgar Soto have been working on diligently and tirelessly. And this is kind of a trial run, So if the reception is really good, fans show up, if it's a smooth operation, that improves Tucson's chances of getting a professional baseball team or something here. It could be a Mexican team too.
Yeah.
There's been talk about that. And
so wait, if they get a Mexican League team, it would be the only United States team. So we would pretty much be like the Toronto Raptors
or the Toronto Blue Jays. Yeah.
Or Toronto Blue. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Pretty much. But not, it's like geographically, it's not a crazy idea, based on how close we are to Mexico. And when you think about like how big the population is of Tucson, like I think Tucson Metro is like 500,000 and the entire kind of area is maybe 1 million. Like it's sort of surprising we don't have professional baseball here, because there are smaller markets that do have it. And this is, I think soccer and baseball are probably the most popular sports among the people who live here. Maybe you could say basketball too, just based out, how popular the U of A men's team has been over the decades. But it's a really good baseball town, and hopefully things will work out where Tucson becomes a pro baseball town again. There will be pros here. Jose Quintana. I think people are very familiar with who Jose Quintana is. He plays for Team Colombia, as does Julio Teheran, Harold Ramirez, Gio Urshela, Rio Gomez, who pitched for the U of A, is on Team Colombia for the second time after he was part of their team back in 23. So it'll be very cool. I'm really looking forward to it.
All right, before we get out of here, we're going to hold off on Twitter mailbag questions until the next podcast, just because we got lots to discuss this week. And
yeah, we haven't even gotten to the combine.
I know that's pretty much
we haven't even gotten to football yet.
That's how we're gonna end things. So the NFL scouting combine is this week in Indianapolis, and 3 Arizona Wildcats are in Indy. One of them could be the highest selected Wildcat in draft history, although I do like Mel Kiper Jr. in his latest mock draft with Tetairoa McMillan going number 22 to the Chargers. I love seeing that. But
don't you mean Tet McMillan?
Yeah, Tet McMillan. Yeah, nobody.
Can we talk about this real quick?
Sure.
I don't know how this happened. I really truly do not know how this happened, but I started to notice it on what I guess you would call like NFL draft Twitter, where these analysts who would post clips or video breakdowns would started calling him Tet McMillan. And I'm like, no one calls him this. Like, this is not a thing. Like, I've never heard him called Tet McMillan. Like, he's been called T-Mac. He's been called Nalo, right? Which is like sort of his like Polynesian nickname. Maybe he's been called Tetairoa. He has never been called Tet. I hope Tet does not catch on. Like,
it won't.
He needs to set the record straight. Let people know. I'm T-Mac. Okay. I'm not Tet.
T-Mac, Nalo, Tetairoa. No Tet.
Tetairoa isn't that hard of a name to spell or pronounce.
Yeah.
Either, right? It's not like Sava Inaya.
Yeah.
Which is a tough one. Which is why we often would just call him Big Jonah.
Big Jonah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think our guy Tet McMillan, I think his 40 time and how he runs the drills at the combine, and if he shows elite route running, some speed, good cuts, if he can run the 40 in a decent time, I think if he's a 4.4, okay, let me ask you this. Let's say he runs a low 4.5. Is that a problem for Tet, or is that good? I feel like that might be a little good, considering how big he is.
I gotta say, I have no idea how he's going to run the 40. I don't know. I don't know like what his training has been like, what kind of numbers he's been putting up. Usually players who are that big don't run sub 4.5. And usually if receivers don't run sub 4.5, they don't go in the top half of the first round. But I think he's an exception because of his size, his body control, his hands, his ability to win 50-50 balls. A lot of comparisons to Drake London when he was coming out of USC. I think Mike Evans is a good comp. If you could have anything close to the career Mike Evans has had, he's probably going to make the Hall of Fame, right? So you're doing pretty well. I think people are just underestimating T-Mac's athleticism overall. We've seen every snap that he's ever played, right? So, I mean, maybe we know a little bit better, but he's very natural. He's very smooth. I don't recall him being caught from behind ever.
No.
Do you?
No.
He got so much better after the catch this past season. I think he runs as fast as he needs to run. So whether that comes out in a timed 40 or not, we'll see. People will probably make a big deal out of it if he doesn't run a good time. But I think if he's in the 4.5, like low 4.5s, or if he can get under 4.5, that would be good enough because he's got everything else.
Yeah, I think T-Mac, regardless, he's going to go in that first round. Part of me is hoping he kind of goes later in the first round because he goes to a winning team, a team that might make the playoffs, rather than the freaking Panthers.
I mean, I just saw a mock draft that had him going 6th
the Raiders.
To the Raiders, and the one you referenced with Mel Kiper, he was going 22nd. I don't think he's going to fall to 22nd. I really don't.
No.
There are not a lot of great wide receivers in this draft. I think the Panthers would be a really good fit, honestly, because I liked what I saw from Bryce Young at the end of the season. He really kind of came into his own and kind of figured it out, and they have a need for a young, alpha receiver down there. They have a really good offensive coach in Dave Canales, so I think that would be a good spot for him. The other two guys who are there, of course, Jonas Savaiinaea, who we referenced earlier, and Tyler Loop, who was, I think, a pleasant surprise that he got invited to the combine. I think very cool that happened for Tyler. What do you need to have to make it as a kicker in the NFL? Well, I mean, accuracy and leg strength, right? He's got both of those. Tremendous leg strength. I mean, he made a 62-yarder this past season. We have seen him in warmups make from 70. Right now, he's not going to play with Tucson's elevation everywhere he goes, but he can be a weapon for you. How many times did Brandon Aubrey kick like 55+ yard field goals for the Cowboys this year? That can really be an asset for your team. He can boot the ball into the end zone, no problem whatsoever on kickoffs. So glad to see that. And also the fact that he got invited to the combine, I think, is an indication of what the NFL thinks of him. Jonah is a really interesting one because played all these different positions here. His arms measured at the the Senior Bowl. His arms measured like tackle length arms. So he might, I think he's being viewed as a guard, but he's someone who if you can play tackle in a pinch, that boosts your stock. That makes you a valuable part of the roster.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what Jonah can do at the combine and Big 12 Pro Day, which was announced today, March 18th through the 21st at the Star in Dallas, Texas. I think regardless, all three of those guys are going to have great NFL careers. Especially, if Jonah can play right guard, it all depends on the situation. If T-Mac can go to a franchise that knows how to use him, Tyler Loop, I feel like he's going to have no issues finding work. And then Jonah, as a right guard, I mean, he could have a 12-year NFL career if he really wanted to. So I think all three of those guys are in really good spots.
I think that Jonah is a natural guard.
Yeah.
He's really big, naturally big. He's the day he arrived here from Hawaii, he was probably 330 pounds and didn't look fat, you know, just one of those guys, really thick legs, carries the weight really well. Didn't miss a snap, I don't think, until the very end of his career when he had a minor knee situation. I envision him going probably in the second round. Maybe he slips into the late first, probably a second rounder, and just one of those guys who's going to have a 10 to 12-year career.
Yep.
You just won't plug and play. You won't have to worry about him. He will get the job done. I think he's more of a guard than Jordan Morgan was.
Yeah.
Jordan Morgan was moved to guard by the Packers. I always thought Jordan Morgan was more of a tackle, more of a, quote unquote finesse offensive lineman.
Swing guy.
If that's possible.
Yeah.
I don't know. You're kind of a finesse offensive lineman, I think, Justin.
Thank you. All right. So NFL Scouting Combine in Indy this weekend. It'll be on NFL Network. We'll have all the coverage on Tucson.com. We got Arizona baseball in Houston, Arizona softball, World Baseball Classic.
And what? There's more. Wait, Call Guard Classic is coming up.
Classic coming up
next weekend. And then before you know it, on March 18th, spring football gets underway. So I don't know. I love this time of year. I don't know about you. It's there's so much going on. It's so fun. Seasons are just getting started. Seasons are ending. There's a lot of drama. We're super busy, but we like being busy.
Absolutely, man.
Yeah.
Pays the bills, that's for sure. So check out our work, Tucson.com. Also subscribe, rate, and comment the Wildcast podcast. You can also subscribe to Spears and Ali, but make sure you get locked in with the Wildcast, where we'll have lots of podcasts coming your way. We appreciate you guys. Thank you for listening and watching on Tucson.com.